Yo, are you kicking it in? Yeah, it's kicking in. Hey, Coach Clay here, and welcome to another episode of the Coach's Notes. I hope you've been enjoying the format so far, with some of the episodes being short and out on location, some of them being interviews, and some of them being in the studio. And as you're going to hear today, back at the Havana Cafe. So definitely right in the mix, in the midst of where all the action is happening. And in fact, this episode of the Coach's Notes is also a simulcast with the Havana Cafe Sessions podcast. My guest is a guy named Dave Anderson, who is one of our long-term listeners of the Havana Cafe Session podcast. In fact, me and Dave go back to my Radio Warwickshire days as well. We talk about some of that on the podcast itself. So Dave's come across from North Hampshire to be on the show. We're here in Leamington Spa, and we have a really good conversation about core values, and it was in response to something that I had posted in the Coach's Notes last week or the week before last. And we thought, hey, why not get together and chat about it? We had some online conversations in the sort of chat and message format, and then it just seemed like a natural thing to say, hey, come and do an episode together. So that is what we've done this episode. And I've been doing some work with core values. I'm starting to write about or talk about core values. So this fits right in. And I've got some more things planned as well coming down. So this will fit nicely in the series on core values. So just before we jump into the episode, if you haven't, which I'm sure you probably have already, be sure to check out the Coach Clay community at coachclay.co.uk. And if you want to join after you've had a look around, you say, hey, this looks like a place I can hang out. If you want to join, just drop me an email at claylow187@gmail.com and I'll send you an invite. Okay, without further ado, let's get into the show. Okay, so this is going to be a simulcast. So I'm going to both send this out to the Coach's Notes podcast. And as we are in Havana Cafe, it's going to go out on the Havana Cafe Sessions podcast.
Good.
So I'm here with Dave. I'm going to let him introduce himself, and we've known each other primarily. So this is the first time we met in real life.
That's right.
Yeah. So it's interesting. It's always an interesting gig because there's a lot of folks that I know virtually, but never met them in real life. So this is actually quite cool to actually again meet someone that because we've been, how long have we been connected?
I think at least 2 years, maybe 3 years.
Yeah, it's probably easily 3 years because it was originally through the Radio Warwickshire stuff.
That's right. Yes.
Yeah, it's easily you'll be 3 years because you go by the Twitter handle of at Folk Dave or Dave Folk Dave.
Yeah, Dave loves folk.
Dave loves folk. That's it. Yeah.
Yeah, which is kind of my play on a little bit of folk music and liking people as well.
Okay. Cool. All right. So before we get into it, because we're going to talk about a topic that we've kind of explored a little bit via the internet, but we thought it would be a great idea to do a podcast on it as well. But just give us a feel for who you are and what it is you do. What's your gig?
Well, I'm relatively simple and straightforward. With a name like Dave, you're going to be that way anyway. I'm a regular sort of guy. As we were talking about earlier, I'm a Generation X. Turned 50 this year, so it's kind of a little
Generation
bit of,
X, man. We have the best generation. Like we got lost, but we shouldn't have been lost. But we're just kind of hang out there. It's just we got to rally the Generation Xers, man.
Yeah. Born and raised in the north of the UK, in Yorkshire. I moved further south
Yorkshire pudding? Is that?
Yeah, Yorkshire pudding and all of that kind of thing.
What else is Yorkshire famous for?
Fish and chips.
Oh yeah, fish and chips. And actually, do you know? And I know we were just talking about cultural differences just before we went live. I struggle with fish and chips. I desperately want to like fish and chips. They look so good. But every time I've made an attempt to have it, I always by the time I get to the end, not liking it.
That's
shocking. I know.
That is shocking. Yeah,
I even went to the place in Yorkshire, supposed to be, you guys are supposed to be really good at the fish and chips. I thought if there's any place I go in the UK, then I should be able to get a decent fish and chips here. And I went to one that's supposed to be famous for its fish and chips, and I still left wanting, man. I still desperately want to like it because it just looks so daggone good, but I don't know.
And it's the original fast food.
Yeah.
It really is, honestly. So
yeah,
and just to maybe kind of round a little bit off on who I am and where I'm at is, I moved further south. I did a course in engineering. Typical kind of met the girl I'm with now, and fell in love and all the rest of it. Settled down, have kids, and then I've sort of growing up. Work as a product manager for a manufacturing company. Actually, as me and Clay have kind of been discussing, is an American multinational. So it's kind of that curiosity between us Brits and working with Americans is very, very different, as we were kind of talking about.
So what's the famous saying that we're a country that's separated by the same language or something like that?
That's right. Yeah, a nation separated by a common language.
By common language, that's it.
But very, very different, cultures. And it's kind of my observation is it starts kind of when you're young.
Right.
And perhaps something as we'll get onto in the podcast today, elements of that start where your formative education and your formative years and your upbringing. And that arises when you're in the world of business and individuals.
Yeah.
It creates that difference. I'm not saying one's right or one's wrong, and you see this across the world.
Sure. Absolutely. And I think that's a good segue into what we're going to talk about, because we're going to talk about values, and particularly core values. Now, because I did a coach's notes on core values, and it was off the back of having run a leadership program for a company. And of course, one of the things a good leader is connected with is the values, or the company values, and every company will have them. But it tends to be, and that was the sense I got from your first tweet. Was you were coming at it from the corporate value point of view.
Exactly.
And what I've noticed in companies is they all have the values. They get stuck up on the walls, or they appear on the website or wherever. But, after the launch of them, if I go into any company and say, what's your company's values, you'd be hard-pressed to find someone who actually can cite all of the companies. Usually typically it's 4 to 5.
Yes.
And they'll be hard-pressed to cite them, to tell you where they are, let alone do they live by those values. And of course, the one that what I did put up was more about your sort of personal core values, but they're very related. It's the same aspect, and it's kind of what you were just explaining there. Even culturally, we'll have a different set of cultures based off of me being an American and how I was raised, and so my values from that American values will be different from British values. And you mentioned earlier, the differences in the states, and I was New Jersey, going to have different set of values from the north versus being in the south. So I was coming at it from the personal value point of view, but I took it from your tweet. You were coming from a corporate.
Absolutely.
space.
I mean, that was the first thing. I'd just come out of work, and it was like work, and my head was right there. And when I saw Clay's tweet, it was like, yeah, okay, well, these are what we do, and do you kind of mean this, and this? Because if I followed my company core values, I'd be innovating with a sense of urgency kind of all day long. And that is typically what, the business core values are. And you said, well, hang on, no. What are your personal core values? truth be known, I can't quite remember what I put.
Oh no! Well, see, now this is interesting because it's one of these things that I find even with personal core values, we all have them.
Yeah.
But it's not something that you typically will sit down to think about. But you'll know when one of your core values is being violated, because by your reaction to the situation, the person,
right.
or that. But in terms of, if we were to randomly go upstairs right now in the cafe and say, "Hey, what are your core values?" Most people upstairs right now wouldn't be able to cite what their core values are. But I think it's a huge thing, and I think it's an important thing to articulate, because your core values operate, and we can go a little bit more in this in the moment, as almost like your compass, your water filter, and as your sort of lodestar or your, something that helps to guide you back on track.
I think that's right. I think for most people out there, and that's probably where my head was at, is I don't think about those core values. That was the first thing, is that, well, where's Clay coming from on this?
Yeah.
And that was the first thing. And within a few minutes, and I kind of sat down and I thought about it, it kind of made sense. And I think the first thing I did respond to you was, as a core value, is I don't like snobs. I avoid snobs was what I said.
Yeah.
And for me, that was kind of an instinct and a way of putting it, because there are certain traits in other people I seek to avoid.
Yeah.
And I don't want anything to do with them.
Do you know what you're articulating now, but this is important, is your shadow side.
All right.
Yeah. So you'll typically, things that you have a negative reaction to, and how you just described it, like you wouldn't want to be seen in that way, that points to your shadow side, which is interesting, which is a whole nother conversation.
Oh, okay.
so we won't go too much into that, but yeah,
a little bit of psychoanalysis going on there.
That's good though. That's good. No, keep going. Sorry, go on. Yeah. So with snobs, you didn't like snobs, but what? So if the snobs point at your shadow side, or what you don't want, what's the opposite of that? So what is it that you value that a snob is not representing?
Yeah, what I don't value are people who are polarized in a certain way of thinking. And, you see in life, you typically get the snobs who will look down on other people.
Right.
And be presumptive of them.
Right.
And you will also get the reverse snobs who will sit from a different viewpoint and look up and be making assumptions of them. And we see this so many times through social media, particularly today, but it's always persisted throughout, my life. And I don't really tolerate them, sort of give them much time, put it that way, and tolerate them. For me, it's...
So what's the actual value then that it's rubbing up against for you?
For me, I guess it's a viewpoint value. Appreciate other people's viewpoint and see where they're coming from. And if somebody is there and I'll always spend the time to kind of figure, and this is kind of maybe my value, is having a kind of a wider view.
So is that like being inclusive?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. There's elements of being inclusive, and it's when you see people who are deliberately want to sit in their own little sphere, and a small little sphere, and won't actually see anything beyond that, and not prepared to see anything beyond that.
Right.
Whether they're we always think in the UK as a snob as somebody who's kind of got lots of money and he's looking down on people beneath them.
Yeah.
And in some cases, I see people who are in a different socioeconomic class who just thinks everybody else is kind of entitled and they're struggling to make a living. But it's people who don't want to connect.
Right.
That's what I don't like.
Okay.
If people aren't prepared to connect, and I absolutely hate that, because where I sit,
and I'm looking at you strange, because you're in terms of a value. I kind of hear two values, and I hear inclusiveness as a value, like so valuing the viewpoints of of everyone, as opposed to being exclusive and I'm from this so to stratus, or I live on this side of the tracks and I don't want to hear anything from you. But then there's the value of connectiveness or connection.
Yes.
So I'm kind of hearing those two things in that, what you're saying.
Yeah, that's right.
If I just define, at least kind of loosely, core values, and we'll continue on, if it's being something that's central or most important to motivation that drives a person and or organization. So usually we'll find you think core values, you start thinking your company ones, but in terms of your core authentic values, it's about the thing that drives you. It's what's important to you, what's your sort of the motivation that sort of guides your decision making, guides the way that you present yourself, the thing that you will go to bat for, the thing that makes you angry if you see it not happening. So that's where we're coming from when we're thinking about core value. And I do have an exercise, but we'll do that after this, after we've had the conversation,
Okay.
that we can have a little sort of play with, to see kind of where you might sort of fall out on that end.
Okay.
Right. Good. Yeah. So what was one of your other ones that came out of that?
I think the other one, and these probably, as you're describing there, Clay, these are probably my traits, and the core values need to be.
Well, if you talk, and I'll pull them out. Yeah, I'll tease them out.
Tease them out of me as we go along. But it was never stop learning.
Okay. Yeah. Cool. Yeah.
And you and I kind of talked about that a little bit before, and again, it's like this personal thing. I'm always willing to learn and understand, and there's that natural curiosity, and I always like to see that in other people as well.
Right.
And I think at the point, me as a person, if I ever sort of like kind of put the shutters down and kind of refuse to stop learning and just kind of, it's like almost resting on your laurels and never progressing. You're never going to fulfill whatever you want to fulfill.
It's almost like you're kind of, you stagnate and die then if you start learning.
There's elements of that, but it's also as if I reflect on my life, and you have this very much in the world we live in is very much a linear approach to life.
Yeah,
and we almost have this linear approach to learning as well. You get to a point, you go through your formative education as a child, and you kind of come out with a almost a stamp on your backside with what your date of manufacture and whether you're A grade, B grade, or C grade. Yeah. And then you go on and you do your other things. And then for most folks, you get to a point of, learning kind of plateaus. But it's actually is more than that. It's being curious about other things and things that you wouldn't naturally do. I mean, when I kind of grew up, I was in this head of engineering. I wanted to learn engineering, and it's all about science and maths and
right.
and that kind of thing. I had absolutely no tolerance with literature or art. It just and things like philosophy were just kind of alien. They were an irrelevance almost. Right. And then as I matured and got a bit older, and that's probably because I've got to a point with my techie type world and my professional world is I've matured, but realizing that these aspects of humans and culture are things to be discovered and learnt and understood because they actually impact. And what I didn't appreciate is that science really originates from philosophy. In my younger days, it was all about the science and the textbooks. And of course, as you get older, you then realize that, and there are other things to learn. So it's kind of that being open to absorb that and not close that down.
Do you know what I think is interesting that you just highlight it for me that I'm thinking is that, if we go back historically, your Leonardo da Vinci's, your Newtons, all these kind of guys were multi-disciplined, weren't they? They wrote poetry, they did math, astronomy. They were very much more. You wasn't a specialist.
That's right.
You didn't go, okay, well, you're going to be an engineer, and that's all you could be. They would be an engineer, and then I'd be a physicist, and then I'd write poetry. And I guess somewhere we lost that. Maybe with the Industrial Revolution, when we kind of said, actually, we got it. It's almost like a factory then, isn't it? Even you mentioned there about the stamp. Even our education became, You start at a certain time in the day, you all come in your class, and I know some of it comes out of because your parents were working in the factory and we needed to do something with the kids because both parents are there. So get them in the school system, you go through, you get your stamp, you all come out the same side, same kind of curriculum and yeah. So we kind of went that way with things about being a specialist. And one of my favorite quotes, Heinen, is specialization is for insects. That's not the full quote, but that's how it ends. That specialization is. It actually comes from ancient Greece, where the actual original quote about a man should be able to, build the ship, con the ship, write poetry, wrestle. There's a whole list of things, and as you mentioned earlier about almost the full concept of man, that you need to be able to do all those things to be a well-rounded individual. And I think like West Point, one of our things is about the whole person. So going into West Point, you got to have the academics. They also look at your community achievements. They also look, where you're an athlete. So you could be super brilliant, but that won't necessarily get you in if you didn't do any sports or you didn't do any civic activities. So you have to show kind of the whole person concept.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that, and that's where it does come through. Is I think, and I see this, and it is maybe as a generational thing as you get to a point in life that you become certainly more rounded, and I appreciate that now.
Yeah,
I appreciate that. I've got to this point, but I'm still willing to learn and understand and take more in.
Which is a good thing, isn't it? I think that's great. Now, and I'm assuming you probably always, as you say, because and we share a value there in terms of, for me, like lifelong learning. Like learning is like the thing for me. But it was probably, you mentioned the word curiosity, so the curiosity and learning go with me. So it's my curiosity to want to know everything about every subject. I can remember as a kid, one of my favorite places to go, my sanctuary was the library.
Oh, yes.
But I was quite a physical dude to climb a tree with the best of them, wrestle, do all that stuff. But my sanctuary was the library. And I'd just go in, no plan. All right, I'll go down this stack. And whatever book caught my attention in that stack, whether I was in science or whether I was in the poetry or whether I was in psychic stuff, it was just like, oh, that's interesting. And then off I go. You should.
It's about discovery, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's all about discovery, and the kind of, I guess that core value for me is lifelong learning. It's all about a life of discovery. There's a big world out there to learn, and it's very easy to kind of close that down and exclude other things when reality is everything has got an influence on everything else. And to your point, like physical exercise has got a bearing on, as we know today, is people's mental well-being. And the origins of science and kind of what I was brought up with kind of Newton's laws of physics and all the mechanical kind of equations and the stuff that sits behind that is actually all about, there was nothing there before people like Newton and Da Vinci and Galileo. They actually created it, but they were philosophers. There was nothing there, and they had to think deeply and then create the maths and the tools around them to kind of develop out the theories. And these were incredibly,
but nowadays,
intelligent
if
people.
If you hadn't gone to university to be a physicist, then nobody would take you serious as a physicist.
Well,
who are you? Come on, what university did you go to?
Absolutely, and that to a certain extent, because we as a species and as a society we've come so far. That still exists today, and you still get and so to close out, when people do go off and study philosophy has a big relevance and an impact on life as we go forward. And how do we discover the cures to cancer? Well, it's actually obviously through hard work and kind of the mechanical research that they have to do, but there's a strong amount of bringing that creative side to it, and you only get the creative side if you unleash the creative spirit, if you like, and allow people to do that and encourage that. And
when you think about philosophy, think about technology as well. Sometimes, and it's one of my favorite lines from Jurassic Park is, we were so enamored with if we could do it, we didn't stop to wonder if we should do it. Can we do it? But we didn't stop to say if we should when they were wanting to bring the dinosaurs back.
Absolutely.
Because I think about technology, and do we think, philosophically, do the technologists are really excited by the technology and what's possible? But do they? And I know they now, like Google has an ethicist and things like that. But it's like, well, what's the effect of this technology going to have on society, on the people? I was down in London yesterday and on the sort of tube ride, and it was interesting because most people were on the phones, and you could just see them all glued to the phones. But there was the occasional person that had the book. I was like, oh, yeah, there's a hardcore person. They have a book, and there was a few people, just staring into space. But the majority of people were on their phone, and it's just curious to me that, what is that? Everyone's like that now. No one's looking around. We're not talking to each other. We don't have that kind of sense. And, well, even if we, and that's the two, but I get it because it's all strangers. But you could go upstairs right now, probably on any table that has more than two people on it, even if it's just got two people on it, somebody will be
they'll be on the phones.
They'll be on their phones. So do we think about what implications that is going to have? Because we've made this thing, what will that have on society? Now, I have a question for you. Because you have kids.
I do, yes.
What values had you instill in your kids?
That leads me perhaps on to value number 3.
Okay.
And this is actually this came quite naturally to me, is look after each other.
Right.
And as my kids got older, that became more important. When you realise that they're going kind of taking that step out into the bigger world with it's kind of as a parent, you see the hazards out there and the risks. Is as you go out together as individuals and particularly as friends, just keep an eye out for each other. You've got a responsibility for yourself, and you've got a responsibility for the friends you're with. And that I think is hangs true for me.
Yeah. What would your kids say, that value that they've taken away from living with you? How old are they?
Well, my eldest is 21 and my youngest is 17, and I've got a son of 18. So,
all right. So what would they say? What would they say? What was the values that Dad instilled in me? What would their response be?
So they probably couldn't tell me, because as a kid at their age, until they have children, you don't appreciate the values that I've tried to instill and my wife have tried to instill on them.
Okay.
Until they do that. Now, if you ask the question slightly differently, which is, have you picked up any values from your upbringing, and how was that?
Okay. Well, what if we looked at it from because you're right. If we said values, would they pick it up? So what do they hold important in life? So what's important to them?
I know from a fact, when I look at all three, there's a common trait, and that's a sense of they want to be part of a team or something bigger.
Right.
For sure.
So the community connection.
The community, yeah. My daughter is kind of taken a good step within her career, but for her it's a strong sense of being part of that team, moving ahead in the team and development within a team and a career and a business and amongst a circle of friends, and that sense of belonging. My son, who is a little bit more laid back, still has, he doesn't have an overly strong bond with his friends and his social network. He's kind of got a loose bond, very much like me. He probably takes after me in that respect, is that he doesn't have the tight bonds there, but nevertheless he needs them and he values them, and you can see that. And particularly as he's now 6 months into an apprenticeship, he has actually transformed in terms of how he fits within the team, and he's getting more of being a team player and finding his way within a team,
right,
working within a team. So they learn all of those aspects as well. And my youngest child, she's still at college, she's actually the one who needs it more. And ever since from being small, she's needed it. It gives her a lot of discomfort if she's kind of outside of the circle, if you see what I mean.
Yeah.
And so I think that's the probably the value, and that probably sits with lots of people. I don't think I'm
It'd be
usually
interesting before they listen to this episode. I ask them to write down what they feel, and let's see if it matches up.
But also, and as I said, it's kind of when they're at that age, they probably don't understand it. They haven't formed that kind of thought process.
I think they will have done, because I reckon they have, because you'll be able to tell by the friends that they keep how they're working. So, because the other thing we have to account for is that, as parents, we would have instilled our values onto them, but then, once they get into the school system, schools trying to impose some values, and they've got friends that they would have connected with, and they pick up. So, because all our core values are going to be different. There'll be some shared ones. So there's probably some that are really strong that you and your wife will probably, it was so instilled in them that, it's just, they just think that's just the normal way that everyone does things. But they will have also picked up things that, just based off their own personality and the way that they develop, that's something that's really important to them.
I think you're right, and these are generational things. They obviously they run through families. These run through communities, and as I kind of look on and reflect on that value, is if I look at those cross-generational things in my family, for instance, what I got from my mother was that learning, lifelong learning. Yeah. She's a lifelong learner in her own way, and never stops and is always curious. What I got from my father from a fairly early age was kind of the sense of duty and the sense of work. You pull your weight when you're working and don't slack type thing. And it's quite funny, really, is that I remember as he was a plasterer, and I actually come from 3 generations of plasterers. It's
nice.
It's
did you break the mold?
Me and my brothers, I've got 2 brothers, we all broke the mold. And it's kind of, we look back through the old family archives and the photos, and you've got my father, his father, and his father's father, all kind of professional plasterers and being craftsmen. But when I was young, it was kind of, as most builders do in the UK, they perhaps have to take on some side work, and that was true in the 1980s.
Right.
And of course, I was dragged along as a teenager, is like be the labourer for my father, who was plastering somebody's ceiling and this kind of thing. Well, the first thing I learned from him is don't stand around with your hands in your pocket.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
And it was, and honestly, and I can't thank my father enough for that, because that subsequently has helped me say, keep yourself busy, keep doing something, because first of all, your boss is kind of looking down and wanting to make sure you're busy. If he thinks you're not being busy, he's either going to give you a kick up the backside, or worst case is he's going to let you go. And there's always something to do in work. Even if it's a case of look around and get a job done that you think needs doing, so open your eyes. And
this is interesting. I'm glad we kind of taken that train, because I'm thinking, as I'm watching young people coming in to the workplace now, and some of the things that their expectations, because they'll have a different generation of, like us. We've raised some kids, but we're going to be a little bit different than our parents were. One, because we sometimes tend to reject the parents, but then we'll come back. But there'll be some stuff that you really take away that you tried to instill to your kids, but then they picked up some other things. And also, I think and I'm definitely from myself, because you want to kind of create an environment that was different from the environment that you weren't able to have, just because whatever the circumstances are. So maybe we do a little bit more for our kids, whereas like I was like, like my dad was kind of like, my mom was like yours, definitely, like the learning, like I wasn't allowed to get low grades. It was like, because and when I traced that back, it's because she had to drop out of school early, and so she always valued education. So then she, that was for her. It was like, you got to do the education thing. But it's funny, those things that we kind of have and we take, and then we try to get to the kids, but then the kids pick up some other things. I guess where I was going with that is some of the things I look at, like with my son even, like for me it was like, because curiosity was my big thing, and I always had this thing that you go out and do whatever you want to do and go find and be outside. I love those things, and I could never understand, even though I exposed that to him when he was a kid, why for that it was like, ugh, what, just weren't connecting with them at all. And or even because I love learning, and the kids would come when they were in school, and they'll ask you a question.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, go find the answer yourself. Like I would go find it. For me, it was go find the answer myself. I would never think to
But just coming in on
do that. Yeah.
They weren't probably connecting the way you wanted them to connect.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Yeah.
They were connecting for sure.
Yes.
But not the way you expected it to be.
Yes.
And they won't. And those connections may not be made at the time that you're trying to instill them. They may be made further down.
Yeah.
Which is kind of my point around when I had to, started working with my father was certainly the connection wasn't there then. I didn't get it. It's kind of, come on, you're busy doing this. Why can't I just stand around and do nothing?
Yeah.
And you realise then that he made that connection to me because he'd had that connection made to him. And it does work its way through. And I'm sure your kids will probably be kind of going, you know what, my dad said this to me, or he made me do this. And he kind of kept banging. And he's just like, I resisted, but now I get it.
Yeah.
Now I do it.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. And then what are they going to pass on to their kids?
Yeah.
I love it. Yeah.
And the other thing I'd like to just kind of come back on with that is that we kind of talked about my values in your question about to your kids was, my personal values. But I've got to look at then the other side of my life, which is my wife, who's got an influence on that.
Yeah.
And what values does she have now?
Yeah.
And this is always a challenge for me. Is kind of what do I think of myself? Is always a hard thing to do. It really makes me think. But if I look at the values that my wife has brought to the children, and what it is today is kind of a sense of urgency.
Yeah.
My wife is a completer finisher type mentality, and I'm kind of not always doing that. I'll be true about it. But she's always kind of instilling me, have you done it? Have you done it? Have you done it? It needs to be done. Or where are we at with that? And she's very much like that. And I think I see that in my daughter in particular, my eldest daughter.
Right.
Is that trait of she's well aware of what needs to be done, when it needs to be done, and always with a bit of a focus of getting the task done by a certain deadline and will work to the deadline.
Yeah.
And
it's interesting you say that because my wife's British, so she would have had the British values and on top of her values that she was brought up with her from her parents, so she would have had those values, the British values, and then my kids have whatever stuff I got from my parents, plus the sort of American values that I kind of picked up, and Army for that matter as well. It's another whole set of values that I picked up from that. So all those values kicking around in the soup, and it's what lands with them. Because I guess to make the point that there are core values, but that doesn't mean that those are your only values. So I always draw it like a bullseye. So in the center you have your core values. Those are like, it's generally like about 3 or 4 of those things. It's like, ugh.
Yeah, that's right.
But then there's values that, I can relate to that. That's good. And then there's
the relatable ones.
Yeah. And then there's some other ones that, again, still sit with you. And to make that connection back with companies, one of the things when I'm doing the sort of leadership training aspect is you have to have shared values. Because if you work at a company if you can't resonate with any of the values of that company, you probably won't stay there very long.
Exactly.
So there's got to be some shared value. Even if it's not one of your core ones, it's got to appear in either the next ring or the outer ring that you can connect with and say, okay, I can kind of dig with that, and that is your connection. But everyone will have their core central to that individual.
Yeah, I level with you because my wife's kind of value of complete or finish, a sense of urgency, is kind of not one of my cores, for sure.
Yeah.
It's actually one of my corporation's values. It's written down there, and I have to follow that in my business life.
Yeah.
But it's not natural for me. It's not one of my personal values.
Yes.
So,
but you can it resonates enough with you to be okay. I can hang with that one.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And that's it. And I think that's it is fascinating. Even as we're speaking now, I'm thinking, well, think of all the different, and as a kid, and as our kids. They had your wife's influence, they had your influence, which would have been from our parents. Then they had their friends and school and society. They're picking up values from there, and then all that sort of gets thrown into the mix. And I guess outcomes of, okay, what as an individual really resonates with me, that then falls into that category of my core values. Like, so for one of mine is, this idea of sort of freedom, as in freedom to explore and to see things and go, and curiosity links quite well with that as well. Because as a kid, I was a very independent person, but I was kind of raised to be independent because my mother lost her mother when she was really young, and she had to look after her brother and her two brothers and their sister, and so she had to grow up fast.
Yes, yeah.
So for her, it was like, well, what happens if I die and you're left? So for her, she always pushed me to be independent from an early age, and her big thing was, you can't depend on anybody, not even me. That has its negative side to it as well.
Yeah.
But she taught me to, cook, clean. I'm 7 and I'm ironing my own clothes. She was, but that was in her head. It was like, you got to be. If I die, you need to be able to take care of yourself. Was her thing. But it taught me an independence, and so I was never one to be like peer pressure or crowds or any of that. I always kind of had my own mind in that sort of sense. And because of this whole learning thing, I had this natural curiosity. So I was always wanting to find out stuff. I was, even as a young kid, I was like 3 grades up in my reading. I hated it as a youngster because I had to go hang out with older kids, and I couldn't understand why I couldn't be with my friends. But the teachers kind of recognized that the level that they were wanting me to read at was just absolutely not a challenge at all. So they kind of, just for that segment, they moved me up. But absolutely hated that. But there's just natural curiosity to want to find and know and do things and learn about anything. And again, it has its consequences. So because my mother was, again, big thing for her was you can be or do anything you want to be. And I always kind of believed that and took that in. So for me, the barriers to anything, it'd be like, oh yeah, I just go learn how to do it and I could do it. I never really saw a need for you're here, you're this kind of person, so you can't do that. So that was never a part of my sort of system. But yeah, I don't even know where I got onto that trait, but I think it was all the soup of things that get thrown in us from the parents and things, and in school, and then what do you end up latching on to, I guess, is that's where we were going.
Well, just real quick, if we may, let's just jump right back to value number 1.
Yeah.
And kind of as you talking about now, I've reflected on it and kind of get a bit more of the vibe. When I said avoid snobs, it's actually tolerance.
Okay, yeah, there we go.
It's actually having a bandwidth for tolerance of kind of other people and other people, and being kind of open to their viewpoints and where they're coming from, because it's all about that. As I've and again, I got this value straight from my mother. She's quite a tolerant person, and you've got to kind of understand where they're coming from. Yeah. Because they will come from different viewpoints and, of course, their own values and their own backgrounds that draws them to that. And particularly in the world of work, that creates actually an incredible strength. You mix of those values together and those experiences, and what you actually get is oftentimes channeled the right way as a competitive advantage.
Yeah, absolutely.
And this is key to it. And any company that's able to kind of embrace that and leverage that, and which I have to say is, I think, one of the strengths of the company I work for, uses that to good effect and actually really is an asset. And I think more people who are kind of tolerant of that, the more, in the bigger picture and the scheme of things, the better society will be for it, and we will have as a positive outlook going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So that was just coming right back to number 1 again, if that was okay.
Yeah, no, I like it. That's good. Yeah. Tolerance. Well, I think and I think when I made that one post and put it out, and we're kind of coming to that space, and this is where I was at. It's like, what's the thing that drives you that would make you, get up in arms about, really, if that thing's being violated?
It does, absolutely. It will, if I get animated about anything, is that level of intolerance between groups of people or individuals.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I can't, I can't.
Yeah.
I hate that. It really,
See, I like it. We definitely hit on it because
I'm
if you
usually
can see Dave's
yeah.
body language now, you can see you getting all fired up. It's like,
Yeah, absolutely. It does. I'm kind of a calm person, but
Yeah.
that particularly, it does make me angry.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
yeah. So are we at number 4 now? Because you
Yeah,
said
yeah,
that
no.
you've got 4 values.
Yeah, no, it's just typically about that, isn't it? It's usually it's not a whole lot of them.
And kind of number 4 for me was, now I used a little, my response was off the cuff, but it's actually at the point when people are making decisions, and what values do I have at points when I make decisions? Because we had this offline discussion, and a large part of what I am as a maker, I'm very analytical, and any test that I take, just prove it time and time again. And most decisions I do made are kind of factually based with that.
Yeah.
But there are points when you have to make decisions in life, and it's kind of you have to throw caution to the wind. Just go with a decision, and maybe it's a heartfelt decision. And don't be afraid to make decisions that are based from your heart rather than your head.
Yeah.
Now, the head is always going to kind of tell you one thing, and like lots of people, you've got to ensure that there's the bills are taken care of. There's food in the cupboard and all the necessities of life. And they govern a lot of what we have to do. But we all know that there are some decisions that you make, and they need to be done from the heart. So don't be afraid to kind of, let's say, throw caution to the wind. Just say, sod it, try it.
Yeah.
You don't know what's going to happen as a result.
And what would you put that as? Adventurous, as in just because I don't know, because adventure means I don't know where the outcome's going to be, but let's go and try it.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, so it's kind of.
Yeah.
Or is it about intuition? Like, don't be afraid to follow your intuition, as in, you have an inner wisdom.
I think it's a sense of freedom it gives you.
Okay.
I think that's the bit, this element of when you're faced with that and you're making a gut instinctive decision, you get an enormous sense of freedom from it.
Right.
Because you're then let loose of the shackles of what were
that's what
pulling
you
you
get.
back.
What would you say is the value? Is it trust yourself?
Yeah, trust yourself.
Trust yourself.
As a species, we've had to learn, adapt, and develop by being quite instinctive in that. And it's probably kind of only in the past sort of generations that this kind of more mechanical way and my natural way of thinking of evaluating and being analytical has been kind of highly developed and honed. But you shouldn't be afraid to rely on your gut instinct.
Yeah.
Because from that you get an enormous sense of kind of freedom and where we need to be.
Yeah, because you mentioned when I was talking about your shadow side, so that's some stuff that's come from young. But as you're talking now, I'm thinking about that whole sort of Jungian psychology. So on the sort of top left-hand side, the sort of analytical kind of space. And how are you doing for time in terms of your parking?
I got 5 minutes. So,
okay.
But I can quickly.
Yeah, no, that's right. Well, yeah, we can pause if you need to go.
Let's pause now.
Yeah.
And we will just
pause.
Yeah.
Oops. That's not what I wanted to do, but that's all right.
Uh-huh.
Oh, yeah, no, that is what I wanted to do.
You don't know your own technology here, Clay.
No. I thought I hit the wrong button, but I didn't hit the wrong button. And you're back from giving the man his money for parking on the street.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well,
absolutely.
I kind of turned the car the other way around, hoping that the kind of 4-hour
okay, gotcha.
no return limit is going to be enough so it'll be just a test of the
system.
of the parking wardens in this town.
Okay, gotcha. So, he turned it around, so that's different, isn't it? All right, cool. All right, so we probably should start to kind of hone ourselves into a sort of conclusion. One of the things I want to say, because I mentioned, a couple of things. So, and I mentioned these 3 sort of metaphors. So when you think about authentic core values and, well, what's important about that? Why identify them? Or why sit down to take the time out to actually articulate what your core values are? And I use the compass, water filter, and the homing pigeon as a sort of metaphor. So if you think of your core values, your authentic core values as a compass. So if you find yourself in murky waters and you're feeling a bit lost, they're a way to reorient yourself on what's important to you in your life. They can act as a water filtration system, like a filter system. So sometimes, and this is an interesting thing as well, and in terms of your own personal effectiveness, understanding what your core values are, because sometimes they can conflict. So you might, and you'll come across, I'm sure, in your work where there's two things that you value, but they're actually in conflict with each other. And then which one and how do you decide between those two to kind of go with part of this exercise if we get a chance to do, that'll sort of come out. But it's a way for helping you to make a decision. So you've got your set of core values. I can filter them through that. Helps you to make better decisions, more sound decisions that are in line with who you are. And then the third part of that was the sort of homing pigeon. So how do I'm off track, and I'm way off base here. How do I get back to who I really am?
That's right.
So it helps you to guide yourself back to who you are at your core. So it's a useful exercise to identify your sort of core values, and you've helped me out quite a lot actually. And you probably don't even realize it because I have this thing where and I've never seen Wurzel Gummidge, right? But they have he has a different heads or hats or something.
He does.
Yeah. So I've never seen it, but people have told me about this guy because I often think, all right, with different heads on, and one of the heads that I put on that I don't normally ever have on because I'm self-employed and all that, but I put entrepreneur head on the other day, and I've just been bursting with ideas because it's a different mindset from being sort of like self-employed sort of coach when you look at as a business owner as opposed to being an entrepreneur. And I don't know if that's a true experience for everyone, but just putting that hat on, and now I'm looking for gaps. So this here just said, okay, what if, because I just wrote them on 3x5 cards, but what if I made a card deck that had these different values on, and the exercise that we're going to run, you go through the deck, you pull out the ones that resonate with you. That'll lend you probably about 10 where you think, okay, these are cool. And then I do this, and I run this exercise. And I don't know why. I've never thought about this before, but having an entrepreneur hat on, I do this in corporate. So you have your 5, and then I tell this story about rescuing the damsel in distress, which I say dimsel actually, so it could be a man or a woman. But you go and you have to give up one of your core values, and it helps you to hone in on what your absolute one.
Wow.
And as you watch people struggle with which one to give up, it's quite an interesting exercise to do. But then I thought, I always write them on 3x5 cards. Why not make a card deck out? I'm sure I can find a manufacturer to do it. One, just to have a set to use, but then 2, in my little shop that's going to go up on the website, which you'll see in the next week or 2. I can start putting stuff in it. So I put on my entrepreneur hat, and all these different ideas have been coming up again. How do I, make a place that's inclusive of others, and they can come and so on, as we were talking kind of offline.
Right.
So yes, okay. Any final sort of thoughts from your point of view in terms of core values, better understanding of it?
I think really, as kind of as we were talking offline, and kind of how we arrive at this point, and you and I are sat opposite each other talking today.
It's not a Havana Cafe session without my man doing this thing.
With the authentic noise in the background of coffee and coffee machines working and bottles being washed and that kind of thing. No, for a lot of people and who may be listening to this, it's not something that we will do day to day, week to week, and really think about it. But it's kind of what is instinctive within us. And as we discuss this, it's kind of linking between what businesses put out there as their core values and what the individuals then within maybe a business or kind of their lives, whether it's a corporate business that I work for or whether it's a social enterprise, they all tend to have their values, their cultures, their norms. But I do think that if people can take the time to reflect and understand their core values, where they've come from, what influenced those core values that they've got, and maybe how they are, as you teased out of me, how they're influenced the next generation or people around me. Because we all have to, it's all interconnected.
Yeah, absolutely.
And, with core values, there's kind of no right or wrong thing. They're just different.
Yeah.
And it's kind of, you bring them all together and you then make something good and powerful with them.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think that's kind of when you said about, well, if you were to really strip away which was the one core value you would hang on to, I think for me it's got to be tolerance.
Okay, excellent, yeah.
Because without that, we're kind of nothing. We can be everything. We can have the sense of urgency, we can innovate, we can do all of the other things. But if we're not tolerant of each other, then we'll never achieve anything.
Yeah, when you get some of the crazy chaos that we have in the world now with the intolerance of others,
you've got that, but and kind of we can see polarization in kind of the different leaders of the world and all of this sort of thing, and different viewpoint. But it all comes together. Solutions are created by people coming together and being tolerant and finding a way forward.
Yeah,
absolutely. At the end of the day, and as Gen Xers, we kind of remember when the Berlin Wall came down.
Yeah.
And everything that came around from that, and those events that made it happen, it was actually a prepared mindset of two big leaders in the world at that time to be tolerant and kind of bring those mental barriers down. And it is really just as a mental barrier. So that's kind of my final kind of really sort of takeaway on today's session is obviously, if you can, take the time, maybe think about them, what influence you, what your values are, and then how those values are influencing other people, whether it's good or bad. And I'm kind of no judge of myself, for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, other people are probably better judges of me and what we've talked today about the values that I think I've got, but they could be very different from what my nearest and dearest see that I have, or my work colleagues or my friends see that I've got. So be kind of...
Yeah, it'd be interesting to get that.
Maybe as another session for another day
absolutely. I just came across, because you just said that, I just came across, but this doesn't do values, but I'm sure someone could do something similar. But it's a website called atmybest.com, but it looks at your strengths, but it's a 360, but you get your friends and that sort of thing, and then you'll see what you think your strengths are versus what your manager or your partner or your friends think yours are. And then you can see where maybe the things are the common links. One, you'll see the things that you're sort of blindsided they don't, that you don't see in yourself.
Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, so I haven't used it yet, but I've got a note, and I'm gonna send it out to test it out, because it looks like a very interesting.
I'll be up for that for sure.
Thing there. So yeah, and in my core value, the one that if I was stripped back to anything, it has to. The one that just drives me absolutely crazy is just the freedom thing. If someone, and in some ways, I suppose it's related to tolerance. It's like the freedom to explore. Someone said, put me in. I can't stand being put in a box, and I like putting other people in the box. Happy for people to have whatever viewpoint they want to have. As long as you're, only place that I draw a line, as long as you're not hurting anyone else, I don't really care what you believe or your thoughts, because there's so many different ways to believe, think, religion. You can have whatever you want. Just don't infringe upon someone else's right to decide what they want for their lives.
Absolutely.
And I'm happy. As soon as that starts to happen, it's like, all right, well, now it's time to get up in arms. All right, very good. No, it was good having meet in real life, as we've been hanging out just in cyberspace. So this is good to sort of actually catch up, and the conversation has been great as well. And
thank you, Claire. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. It's been good to connect and chew the cud, so to speak.
Yeah, it'd be good. And I want to hear back on what your kids and wife think your values are.
I'm not brave enough to go there.
Well, don't open up that Pandora's box.
That's right.
All right, awesome, buddy. Thanks a lot.
All right.
All right, hey, thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoyed this episode. Why not join the discussion and share some of your core values over at coachclay.co.uk in the comment section down there. And let us know how you use your core values to help you navigate the world. And if you like, or if you would like some help figuring out your core values, why not set up a coaching session with me, coaching call, and we can start that conversation. You can find a link on my website to a scheduler, so you can just hop on in there, click the button, find a convenient time for us both, and let's get to it. Let's get to it. Anyway, that's it for me for now. This is Coach Clay. Peace out.